On my birthday, my son left me in a nursing home, alone, forgotten. It broke me, but it also woke me up. I spent my whole life giving to others, and that day, I decided it was time to live for me. A week later, I won the lottery. I bought a mansion. Yes, but more than that, I bought my freedom. I walked away from a life of sacrifice, from a son who never truly saw me, and I started living for myself. No more waiting for someone to love me. I was done being invisible. And Ben? He had no idea what was coming. My name is Evelyn. I've spent most of my life as a mother, as a wife, as a caregiver. I've made countless sacrifices for the people I loved, especially for my son, Ben. I gave everything to raise him, to make sure he had every opportunity I never had. I worked multiple jobs, gave up my own dreams, all to ensure that he would grow up to be successful, happy, and loved. And for the longest time, I thought I was doing it all for the right reasons. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened on my birthday last year. I woke up that morning expecting a simple, quiet celebration. Just me, maybe a cup of tea, and a call from Ben. Nothing extravagant, but it was all I needed. After all, I had spent so many birthdays over the years doing for others, putting myself last, that I thought maybe this one would be for me. But that wasn't how it played out. I had been living at Greenfield Retirement Home for the last few months after I had fallen ill. Nothing too serious, just a bit of a health scare that had left me unable to care for myself the way I once had. The place wasn't bad. It was clean, quiet, and the nurses were kind. But still, it wasn't home. It was far from it. And I missed my house. I missed the way my kitchen smelled of fresh bread and coffee. I missed my garden, the one I spent years cultivating. And most of all, I missed my family. I had hoped Ben would come to see me on my birthday. After all, he was the only family I had left. His father had passed away a few years ago, and the emptiness of the house had only grown since then. Ben, my only child, was all I had left in this world. Around noon, I received a call from the nursing home's receptionist telling me that Ben was on his way. I felt a surge of warmth in my chest. Maybe this would be the birthday that proved all the sacrifices had been worth it. Ben and I would sit down together, have a nice lunch, and I could finally tell him how much I appreciated him. But then came the knock on my door. I smiled, expecting Ben to walk in with that goofy grin of his, the one that made everything feel better. But when I opened the door, it wasn't Ben standing there. It was a nurse. And behind her, a man in a suit who I didn't recognize. My heart sank. "Mrs. Walker, we're so sorry," the nurse said, her voice gentle but detached. "There's been a misunderstanding. Ben couldn't make it today. He, had a business trip he had to attend to." I blinked, trying to process what she was saying. "Business trip?" I repeated, confused. "On my birthday?" She nodded, looking a little uncomfortable. "Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry." My throat tightened. I tried to hide the hurt, but it was impossible. I had been looking forward to seeing my son, to having him remember me, even if it was just for a little while. And now, here I was, alone on my birthday in a place that wasn't home, with no one but strangers around me. The nurse must have seen the pain in my face because she gave me a soft smile and patted my arm. "I'm sure he'll call later. Maybe he's just busy. He's probably got a lot on his plate, you know." But I didn't want to hear that. I didn't want excuses. I didn't want to hear about Ben's busy schedule. All I wanted was to hear his voice, to see him walk through that door and tell me happy birthday, to remind me that he cared. Instead, I spent the rest of the day sitting in the quiet of my room, the phone never ringing, the minutes crawling by. I didn't cry, not immediately. I just felt an overwhelming sense of loneliness, of abandonment. It was like the world was telling me that I no longer mattered, that all my years of sacrifice had been for nothing. The hours stretched on, and I finally forced myself to sleep. But as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that something inside me had changed. I had spent my life giving everything to my family, to my son, and what had it earned me? A cold, empty room on my birthday, with no one to share it with. And then, just as I thought the night was over, the phone rang. It was Ben. Finally. I picked up the phone, my heart racing, hoping that he had come to his senses, that he would apologize, that he would tell me he loved me. But when I heard his voice on the other end, I was hit with something that I wasn't prepared for, something that cut deeper than anything I had felt all day. "Hey, Mom," Ben said, his voice distant. "Sorry I couldn't make it. I just wanted to call and wish you a happy birthday. Hope everything's going well." His words were polite, but there was no warmth in his voice, no love, no connection. Just a quick check-in, as if he were calling to tick a box on his to-do list. I could feel the distance between us growing wider with every passing second. "Well, thanks for calling," I said, trying to keep the tremble out of my voice. "It's been a quiet day, but I'm fine." There was a pause on the other end, and I knew he could sense the hurt in my words. He didn't say anything at first, and then, as if to wrap up the call, he added, "All right, Mom, I gotta go. I've got some things to take care of. I'll talk to you later." And just like that, he hung up. I sat there for a long time, the phone still in my hand, staring at the screen. The silence was deafening. I had spent my entire life doing everything for him, for Ben, and he couldn't even spare a single moment to be with me on my birthday. The day I had given birth to him, the day I had brought him into this world, had come and gone without so much as a second thought from the one person I thought would always be there. That was the moment I realized Ben wasn't the person I thought he was, and I wasn't going to waste any more of my life waiting for him to change. Little did I know that lonely birthday would be the turning point, the moment when my life would change forever. The next few days felt like an eternity. Each moment dragged on, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something had broken inside me, something that couldn't be fixed. Ben's cold indifference had pierced right through me. I couldn't stop replaying the phone call, his detached voice, the way he had barely given me a second of his time. It was as if I was a mere afterthought, a mere obligation he had to fulfill before getting back to his real life. I spent the next few days at the nursing home, going through the motions. I didn't have the energy to interact with the other residents much, even though I knew I should have. I wasn't interested in the small talk, the gossip, or the games. The idea of being surrounded by people who were just as lonely, just as forgotten as I was, felt suffocating. I spent my days in silence, staring out of the window, watching the world go by. The trees in the garden were turning golden with the season, and the crisp autumn air reminded me of the days I used to spend with Ben, walking through the park, laughing, talking about the future. Those days felt so far away now, like another lifetime. One morning, as I sat in the common room, absent-mindedly flipping through a magazine, I overheard a conversation between two women in their 70s, both sitting at the table across from me. "I heard that the lottery jackpot is at an all-time high this week," one woman said, her voice filled with excitement. "Can you imagine what you could do with that kind of money?" "I'd buy myself a new house, a beautiful one by the beach," the other woman responded with a wistful sigh. "Maybe travel, see the world before it's too late." The conversation continued, but I tuned it out, my thoughts wandering. The idea of winning the lottery seemed almost laughable. How could someone like me, someone who had spent a lifetime sacrificing for others, possibly win something like that? It felt impossible, but still the thought lingered, like a tiny spark of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe it was just a fleeting fantasy. But in that moment, sitting alone in that sterile nursing home, I realized something that hit me like a bolt of lightning. I had nothing left to lose. Ben had abandoned me. The people I had cared for my entire life had all but forgotten me. I had given up everything for others, and what had it gotten me? A cold, lonely room in a retirement home, spending my days in silence, waiting for someone to remember I existed. But what if I could change that? What if just for once I could do something for me? That night I made a decision. I had some savings tucked away, enough to keep me comfortable in the nursing home for a while longer. But I didn't want to live out the rest of my days like this. I didn't want to wait for Ben or anyone to show up and make me feel like I mattered. I wanted something for myself. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that winning the lottery, though unlikely, was my ticket to taking back control of my life. I bought a ticket. And as I stood at the counter holding that little slip of paper, something shifted in me. For the first time in a long while, I felt something resembling excitement. Maybe it was the thrill of possibility, or maybe it was just the knowledge that I was doing something for myself, for once. Either way, it felt good. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want to jinx it. I didn't want to get anyone's hopes up, especially my own. But that night, as I lay in bed, I allowed myself to imagine what it would be like, what it would feel like, to win, to have the money to live freely, to go wherever I wanted, to buy a home, a place that was truly mine. I dreamed of a mansion by the ocean, just like the woman at the nursing home had said. A place where I could spend my days in peace, surrounded by beauty and solitude. The next few days passed in a haze of waiting. I kept my expectations low, reminding myself that the odds were slim. But deep down, a small part of me began to believe. I began to think that maybe this could be my second chance. My opportunity to finally get out of this life that had become nothing more than a shadow of what it should have been. Then, a week later, it happened. The lottery numbers were announced, and I watched with bated breath as the news anchor read them off one by one. As the numbers rolled across the screen, my heart skipped a beat. I grabbed the ticket from my purse, my hands trembling as I scanned the numbers. One by one, they matched. I was stunned. I sat there in disbelief for a few moments, the reality of it sinking in slowly, as if it was too good to be true. I had won. The jackpot was mine, the mansion of my dreams, the freedom to finally live the life I had always imagined was suddenly within my reach. For the first time in a long time, I felt something rise within me, a rush of power, of possibility. I wasn't just Evelyn anymore. I was someone who could take control of her life, someone who could walk away from the past and into a future of her own making. The nurse came into the room just as I was staring at the ticket, still in shock. "You okay, Mrs. Walker?" she asked, noticing the ticket in my hand. "I think I just changed my life," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was racing. And that was it. In that one moment, everything changed. I was no longer waiting for Ben, for anyone to make me feel important. I had done it for myself. The world had just opened up, and I was ready to walk through the door. The first few days after I won the lottery felt like a blur. I didn't tell anyone right away. Part of me wanted to keep it to myself for just a little while longer, to savor the moment before the world started pulling at me, asking questions, demanding answers. The nurse who had walked into my room that day didn't know anything about it, and neither did the other residents at Greenfield. I wasn't ready for the pity or the questions. I wasn't ready to explain how, in an instant, my entire life had shifted. The first thing I did after I regained my composure was call my lawyer. I needed someone who could handle the logistics, someone who could make sure that I wasn't taken advantage of, that I wouldn't lose everything I had just gained. I knew that people would come out of the woodwork once they found out. I wasn't naive. I'd seen it happen before with people who won big. The vultures would circle, wanting a piece of the prize. But this time, I was going to be smarter. This time, I wasn't going to be taken for a fool. I could still remember Ben's voice from the phone call on my birthday, the cold indifference, the way he had barely spared me a moment of his time. That was all I needed to know. He wasn't going to be a part of this new life of mine, not unless he came to me on my terms, not unless he finally showed me the respect I deserved. And I wasn't about to let him, or anyone else, ruin what I had worked so hard to build for myself. It was time to make some changes. The first thing I did was hire a real estate agent. I knew exactly what I wanted. I had always dreamed of living in a large, beautiful house by the ocean, a mansion with sweeping views, a place where I could have the peace and solitude I had longed for. I didn't need anything extravagant or flashy. I just needed a space that felt like mine, a place where I could heal and create new memories without anyone's interference. Within days, I found the perfect place. It wasn't just any mansion, it was a sprawling estate on a cliff overlooking the ocean. The house had everything I wanted: an open floor plan, large windows that let in the light, and a huge garden I could tend to myself. It was exactly what I had imagined, and more. The second I walked through the front door of that mansion, I knew I had made the right choice. The air smelled fresh, the sound of the ocean waves crashing against the rocks below was calming, and the house felt like a blank canvas, ready for me to fill with my own life. I had spent so many years living for others, trying to please Ben, my husband, and everyone else around me. Now it was time to live for me. I was going to fill this space with everything I wanted, without apology. It wasn't long before the news about my win began to spread. I didn't make a big announcement. I didn't go on social media or try to make a spectacle out of it. But people talked, and word got out. Soon I started receiving messages, some congratulatory, some curious, and some downright angry. Ben, of course, was the first to reach out. He called me the day after I closed on the mansion, his voice thick with tension. "Mom," he said, his tone defensive, "I heard about the house, the mansion. I don't understand why you didn't tell me about the lottery. You're my mother, and you should have shared this with me. I'm your son. I've been there for you." I let him talk, listening to the familiar whine of entitlement in his voice, but I wasn't moved, not anymore. "I didn't tell you because, Ben, you haven't been there for me. Not the way I needed you to be," I said, my voice calm but firm. "On my birthday, I was alone. I waited for you to show up, to show me that I mattered. But you didn't. And I've had enough of waiting for you to care." There was silence on the other end of the line, and I could almost hear the wheels turning in his head. I didn't mean to hurt you," he said finally. "I've just been really busy with work, you know that. I didn't think you'd mind." "I mind," I said, my voice resolute. "And I'm done pretending I don't. I've given you everything, Ben, everything, and now it's my turn." There was another pause, longer this time. Ben finally spoke, his voice quieter, more subdued. "You're really going to shut me out like this, after everything?" "I'm not shutting you out," I replied. "But I can't keep giving and giving if you're just going to take. I won the lottery, Ben. I don't need you to take care of me anymore. I'm taking care of myself now." I could hear him take a deep breath. "So what? You're just going to live in your big house, all alone?" I felt the sting of his words, but it wasn't the kind of pain I had felt before. It was a different kind of hurt, a realization that the person I had always loved, the person I had always tried to protect, was never going to be the person I needed him to be, but I wasn't going to cry over it anymore. "I'm not alone," I said softly. "I have me, and that's enough." I hung up the phone without another word. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I was just done. I had spent my life trying to make Ben happy, trying to make him proud of me, but I wasn't going to sacrifice myself anymore. I wasn't going to lose myself in the process of loving him. The next day, I moved into my new mansion. I didn't wait for Ben to come around, and I didn't care if he ever did. This was my life now, and I was going to live it on my terms. As I walked through the halls of my new home, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just surviving, I was living. And as for Ben, well, I had done my part. The rest was up to him. The weeks after I moved into my new mansion were a blur of excitement, disbelief, and a deep, satisfying sense of freedom. For the first time in decades, I wasn't playing the role of caretaker, of provider, of the person who everyone turned to when they needed something. I was simply Evelyn, No longer defined by the expectations others had placed on me, no longer just a mother or a wife or a dutiful daughter. I was a woman who had finally taken control of her own life. I spent my days settling into my new home, decorating it just the way I wanted. The walls that once felt cold and impersonal began to take on character. I painted the rooms in colors that made me feel calm, choosing soft pastels for the bedrooms and rich, warm tones for the living spaces. I planted a small garden in the backyard, a beautiful oasis with flowers that bloomed even in the colder months. I spent hours outside, tending to it, enjoying the peace that came with simply nurturing something. It was something I had never had the time for before, and now it was a symbol of the life I was finally able to build for myself. I also started to explore my new town. I joined a local book club, and to my surprise, I met a group of women who shared my interests. Women who were kind, who didn't look at me with judgment or pity, but with curiosity and respect. They didn't see me as just an elderly woman in a nursing home, waiting for her time to pass. They saw me as an equal, as someone who had stories to tell, ideas to share. And for the first time in ages, I felt like I belonged. But even in the midst of this newfound happiness, I couldn't escape the inevitable. Ben's calls became more frequent. He didn't call to apologize, not directly. Instead, his messages were filled with attempts to guilt me into feeling sorry for him. At first, I ignored them, unwilling to engage. I had done nothing wrong, and I wasn't going to let him manipulate me any longer. Still, the messages kept coming. Ben. Mom, I've been thinking about everything, and I know I messed up. I should have been there for you. I know you're angry, but I just want to make things right. Ben. I didn't mean to hurt you. I've just been so busy. You know how things are. I'm your son. I'm family. Please don't shut me out. I'm sorry. I read each message, feeling a flicker of something deep inside me. Anger, hurt, maybe even a hint of hope. I wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that the son I had raised could finally see me for who I truly was. But the truth was, I wasn't sure anymore. I wasn't sure he deserved a place in my new life. One evening, after a particularly persistent round of messages, I decided to call him back. I needed to hear his voice. Not because I missed him, but because I needed to know where we stood, once and for all. Hello? His voice was tentative, like he wasn't sure if I was still angry, still hurt. I got your messages, I said, my voice calm but firm. I've read them all, and I'm not angry, Ben, but I need you to understand something. I didn't leave you. I didn't abandon you. I just stopped pretending that you were ever going to show up for me the way I showed up for you. There was a long pause, and I could hear him shifting on the other end, struggling to find the right words. Mom, I'm sorry. I really am. I know I've let you down, but you're my mom. I'm not just going to let you go. I took a deep breath. You didn't just let me go, Ben. You were never really there. You were always too busy. I've spent years putting your needs, your desires, above my own. And look where that's gotten me. Alone on my birthday in a nursing home, forgotten by the one person I thought would always remember me. He sighed, his frustration creeping into his voice. I didn't forget you, Mom. I just didn't know what you needed. I didn't know how to be there for you. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of his words. I knew he didn't get it, not completely, but I also knew that I didn't have to carry the weight of our relationship on my own anymore. I've learned something, Ben, I said, my voice softening slightly. I've learned that I don't need you to fix me. I don't need you to take care of me. I need you to be there, yes, but I can't keep waiting for you to choose me. I've had to choose myself. There was another silence, but this one felt different. It felt like he was finally hearing me, or at least trying to understand. But in the end, I realized that the choice wasn't mine to make anymore. I couldn't force him to change, and I couldn't force him to be the son I wanted him to be. I had to let him go, too. I think I've said everything I needed to, Ben, I said, my voice steady. I'm not closing the door completely, but I need you to understand that my life doesn't revolve around waiting for you anymore. I'm living it for me now, and if you want to be a part of it, you'll have to show up on my terms." His voice was quieter now, almost resigned. "I understand, Mom. I'll try to do better. I don't want to lose you." "I hope you don't," I replied before ending the call. As I put the phone down, a strange sense of peace washed over me. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't heartbroken. I was simply free. I had given him everything I had for years, and now I was giving myself everything I needed. I was no longer defined by what Ben needed or expected. I was living for me. I stood up and looked out over my new garden, the sun setting over the ocean, casting a warm glow over everything. The house felt like home now, not just a place to stay. It felt like the beginning of something new. I had finally taken control, and that was just the beginning. As the days turned into weeks, I realized something remarkable. I had started living for myself in a way I never had before. There was no more hiding behind roles that others expected me to play. There was no more suppressing my own desires and needs to make others happy. I had spent so many years giving, sacrificing, and hoping that one day someone would see me for the person I was, not just the person I had become out of duty. But now I was done with that. I was Evelyn, the woman who had chosen herself. The mansion felt more and more like home every day. It wasn't just a place to sleep or store my things. It was where I could be myself, truly and completely. I didn't have to answer to anyone. I could wear whatever I wanted, eat whatever I wanted, and do whatever I wanted. The house was full of light and space for my thoughts, my plans, and even my doubts. I didn't feel smothered by others' expectations anymore. It was quiet, peaceful, and mine. I hired a small staff to help with the upkeep, just a couple of people to tend to the house and garden. They were polite, kind, and respectful, but most importantly, they didn't see me as just a client or an elderly woman. They treated me like a person. That was something I hadn't realized I had been missing for so long. Respect. Genuine respect. The rest of my time was spent exploring new hobbies. I took up painting, something I had always wanted to try but never had the time for. I joined a local charity, helping organize events for people in need. I started volunteering at a local animal shelter, caring for abandoned dogs and cats. I loved it. It was fulfilling, and I was able to make a difference without expecting anything in return. I felt useful again, but this time, it was because I chose to be. Despite the peace I had found in my new life, there were still moments of reflection. I often found myself looking out over the ocean, lost in thought. Ben's absence still stung sometimes, especially on quiet evenings when the loneliness seemed to settle in. But I had learned that being alone didn't mean being lonely. I had learned to fill the silence with my own thoughts, with the things I wanted to do, not what others needed from me. And then, one afternoon, I got a surprise. It was a letter from Ben. This wasn't a text or a phone call. This was an actual, handwritten letter. I hadn't heard from him in a while, not in person, not like this. The letter was short, but it was filled with sincerity. "Mom, I've thought about everything you said. I know I've let you down. I've been selfish, and I've ignored your needs for too long. I don't expect things to go back to how they were, but I want you to know that I've been working on myself. I want to be the son you deserve, not the one I've been. I miss you. I'm sorry. I hope you'll consider seeing me again. Ben." I sat there for a long time, holding the letter in my hands. It wasn't a grand apology. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. For the first time in a long time, Ben had taken responsibility for his actions. He hadn't asked for forgiveness, not outright. But there was an acknowledgement that he had hurt me, that he had taken me for granted. I knew what I had to do. It wasn't about shutting him out completely, not anymore. But it wasn't about letting him waltz back into my life on his terms either. He had to prove he had changed. He had to show me that he could respect my choices, respect my boundaries. I decided to call him back, not with anger, but with a calm, measured response. I wasn't going to accept anything less than respect moving forward. If Ben truly wanted to be a part of my life again, he would have to earn it. The conversation wasn't easy. He had a lot of excuses, but I was firm. I explained that I had made my peace. I had built a life that I loved, a life that was no longer dependent on him or anyone else. I was happy, but I was willing to make room for him as long as he came with sincerity and respect. Mom, I know I've messed up, and I know I can't change the past, but I'll do whatever it takes, Ben said on the phone, his voice breaking with emotion. I just want to make things right. I didn't promise him anything. I didn't say that we would just pick up where we left off, but I told him that I would see him, in time, under my terms, and only if he showed me that he could be the person I had always hoped he would be. As the call ended, I felt a strange sense of peace. Maybe we could rebuild, maybe not, but it was up to him now. I had given him all the chances in the world before, and I wasn't going to do it again unless I saw a genuine change. I had learned that I didn't have to settle for anything less than what I deserved. That evening, as I sat in front of a new canvas, paintbrush in hand, I realized something. I wasn't holding on to the past anymore. I wasn't waiting for someone to save me or make me feel complete. I was already whole. I had everything I needed. This life, my life, was mine, and no one could take that away from me. Ben could come back into my life if he wanted to, but I had finally learned that my happiness wasn't dependent on anyone else. It was mine to create, and that, in itself, was the greatest gift I had ever given myself. The future was mine to shape, and for the first time in a long time, I was excited for what it held. The weeks following Ben's letter felt like a slow, steady healing process. I didn't rush anything. I was learning, bit by bit, that life wasn't something to be rushed through. It wasn't something to be dictated by expectations or obligations. My new life was about finding peace in the everyday, enjoying the present, and not worrying so much about what might happen in the future. I didn't hear from Ben immediately after our phone call. At first, I wondered if I had made a mistake, if I had been too harsh with him. But then I remembered that I wasn't doing this for him. I was doing it for me. I had spent so many years making excuses for others, excusing their bad behavior because I didn't want to be alone. But now, I was choosing to be alone, if it meant I could find peace. I kept myself busy. There was so much to do around the mansion, and I was finally free to do things on my own schedule. I loved taking long walks around the property, letting my thoughts wander as I admired the flowers I had planted. It felt like my heart was blooming in the same way. I was finally in control, and the weight of years of silence, self-sacrifice, and unappreciation had lifted. I continued to volunteer at the animal shelter, and I even started to adopt a few stray cats. It felt good to have something to care for again, something that needed me but didn't take me for granted. I found joy in these small things. The sound of their purring as I stroked their fur, their playful antics that made me laugh. They reminded me that I was worthy of love and care, and I had forgotten that for so long. One afternoon, as I was sitting in my favorite armchair by the window, sipping tea and watching the rain fall outside, I received a call from Ben. His voice was hesitant, like he wasn't sure how I would react. "Mom," he said, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about how I've taken you for granted. I know it's not going to be easy, but I want to be a part of your life again. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove that I've changed." I closed my eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. I wasn't surprised by his call, but I was glad to hear it. Ben had always been a good man, deep down, but he had been consumed by his own life, his own ambitions, and he hadn't learned to appreciate what truly mattered. I wanted to believe that he was ready to change. I wanted to believe that he was finally seeing me, truly seeing me. Not as his mother who could do everything for him, but as a woman who deserved respect and love in return. "I'm glad you're reaching out, Ben," I said, my voice steady. "But just know that it's going to take time. You can't just come back into my life as if nothing ever happened. You need to show me that you respect my boundaries. You need to show me that you're here for me, not just when it's convenient for you." "I understand," Ben said, his voice quiet. "I really do. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry I made you feel like you didn't matter. I won't make that mistake again." I smiled softly to myself. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was real, and that was all I had ever wanted. I wasn't asking for him to fix the past. I was asking for him to show up, to prove that he had learned from his mistakes. "I'm not promising anything," I continued, "but I'm willing to take this one step at a time. We'll take it slow, and we'll see where it goes." There was a long pause, and when Ben spoke again, I could hear the relief in his voice. "I understand, Mom. Thank you. I'll prove it to you. I'll show you I've changed." The conversation ended on a hopeful note, but I knew this was just the beginning. I didn't expect miracles, and I didn't expect things to magically go back to the way they were. We had both changed. I had changed, and I was determined to protect my newfound peace. Ben had to show me that he could respect that. Over the next few weeks, we kept in touch, slowly rebuilding the bridge between us. Ben visited me a few times, and each time I could see the effort he was putting in. He was different, more thoughtful, more present. We didn't talk about the past much, but I could feel the shift. He was no longer the son who took me for granted, who only reached out when it suited him. He was trying, and that was enough for me for now. But as much as Ben's efforts meant to me, I knew that my life was still my own. I wasn't going to let anyone, no matter how much I loved them, disrupt the balance I had found. I had learned that my happiness didn't depend on anyone else's approval, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me again. I woke up each day, grateful for the life I had built, for the freedom to live on my own terms. I continued to fill my days with things that made me happy: reading, painting, volunteering, and caring for the animals. I even started to take short trips, something I had always wanted to do. The world was wide, and I had all the time I needed to explore it. Ben was a part of my life again, but I had learned not to put my entire identity in him or anyone else. I was Evelyn, strong, independent, and free, and that was more than enough. As the months passed, I grew more comfortable in my new life. I no longer waited for anyone to make me feel important. I had become important to myself, and that was all that mattered. The future still held uncertainty, of course, but it didn't frighten me anymore. I was finally living the life I deserved, the life I had earned, and nothing, not even Ben, could take that away from me. As time passed, my life settled into a rhythm I had never experienced before. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but it was mine. I woke up every day in a house that felt like home, with the freedom to do whatever I pleased. The days of catering to everyone else's needs, of feeling invisible or unimportant, were behind me. I was free to be myself, and that felt like a luxury I had never truly appreciated until now. Ben continued to make efforts, albeit imperfect ones, and I had begun to see glimpses of the son I had hoped he would become. His visits were more frequent, though we kept things casual. He no longer expected me to cater to his needs or rely on me for his emotional support. He was beginning to understand that love doesn't mean taking someone for granted. We spoke more honestly, and for the first time in years, I felt like there was a mutual respect between us, something we had never really had before. I never put pressure on him. I didn't need grand apologies or declarations of undying devotion. I simply needed him to show up, and he was, slowly but surely. Our relationship wasn't perfect, and I didn't expect it to be, but it was real, and it was building on a foundation of understanding rather than expectation. As I spent time with Ben, I found myself becoming more and more connected to the world around me. I reconnected with friends I had lost touch with years ago, people who had been there for me long before I became consumed by my role as a mother. I began to travel more, places I had always dreamed of visiting but never had the time or energy to explore. I spent a week in a small cottage by the coast, enjoying the quiet, watching the waves crash against the shore. I stayed in a charming town in the mountains, hiking and photographing the breathtaking scenery. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something to change. I wasn't waiting for someone to come and make my life meaningful. I had already done that myself. I was living fully and completely, and the world was open to me in ways I never imagined possible. One evening, as I sat by the window watching the sun set over the ocean, I thought about how far I had come. Just a year ago, I had been alone in that sterile nursing home, abandoned on my birthday by the one person I thought would always be there for me. And now, here I was, in a mansion of my own, doing exactly what I wanted, living the life I deserved. I thought about the lottery win, how it had been the catalyst for all this change. But in reality, the money wasn't what had transformed my life. It wasn't the house, the trips, or the new things I could buy. It was the freedom to choose how I wanted to live, to stop waiting for permission, to stop sacrificing my happiness for the sake of others. For so long, I had thought that I needed someone else to make me feel whole, but I had learned that I was already whole. I had always been whole. The lottery was just a symbol, a catalyst for the deeper changes that had been brewing inside me for years. It wasn't the jackpot that made me wealthy. It was the realization that I had the power to live my life on my terms. And then there was the mansion. It was beautiful, peaceful, and everything I had ever dreamed of. But more than that, it was mine. No one else's. Not Ben's. Not anyone's. It was a reflection of everything I had worked for, everything I had fought for. And in its quiet luxury, I found the space to rediscover who I was. Ben came to visit one afternoon, bringing with him a small, humble gift. Just a simple potted plant from my garden. It wasn't much, but it was meaningful. He looked around the house, his eyes wide, clearly impressed by everything I had built. He didn't say anything, but I could tell that he understood now. He understood that my life wasn't about being his caretaker, his emotional support, or his fallback. I was a person, a woman with her own dreams, and he was starting to see me as that. "I'm really proud of you, Mom," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "You've done something incredible. I didn't know you had it in you." I smiled at him. It was the first time he had ever truly acknowledged me for who I was, not just for what I had done for him. "I've always had it in me," I said gently. "I just needed to believe in myself." And that was the truth, wasn't it? The real gift I had given myself wasn't the mansion or the money or even the freedom. The real gift was the confidence to finally believe that I was enough, that I had always been enough. As Ben left that day, I watched him go, not with sadness or regret, but with a sense of acceptance. I didn't need him to validate my choices anymore. I didn't need him to prove anything to me. The relationship we had was no longer one-sided, no longer rooted in what I could do for him. It was a new kind of relationship based on mutual respect, understanding, and the acknowledgement that we were both free to live our lives in the way that suited us best. The future didn't feel so uncertain anymore. I had learned that the only person responsible for my happiness was me. And I was doing everything I could to ensure that happiness was mine to keep. In the quiet of the evening, as I sat by the fire with a glass of wine in my hand and a book in my lap, I realized that for the first time in my life, I was truly at peace. This was the life I had always deserved, and it was mine. As time went on, I found myself more content than I'd ever been. Life was still unpredictable, of course. Nothing ever truly settles completely. But I had learned to embrace the chaos and the calm in equal measure. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't afraid of loneliness or uncertainty. or the possibility of Ben not being in my life the way I once imagined. I had come to realize that life wasn't about waiting for someone else to make it worth living. It was about living it fully on your own terms, regardless of what others thought or expected. The mansion became more than just a physical space. It became a symbol of my independence, of my strength. It was my sanctuary, a place where I could reflect, dream, and grow without fear of judgment or guilt. Every corner of the house, every room was infused with a part of me. It wasn't about showing off, it was about creating a space that truly reflected who I had become. A woman who had spent too long in the shadows, who had been forced to silence her own needs for the sake of others. Now I was reclaiming my life. Ben continued to visit, but it was different now. We were no longer stuck in the old patterns of our relationship, where I gave endlessly and he took. It was still delicate, still a work in progress, but there was something fundamentally more balanced between us. He had learned, in his own way, what it meant to be a son who truly respected his mother, and I had learned to set boundaries that protected my peace. I began to allow him in more, but only when he showed up as an equal. No more excuses, no more manipulation. If Ben wanted to be a part of my life, he had to be willing to work for it, just as I had learned to work for my own happiness. And he did. Slowly, but surely, he proved that he was willing to try. And for the first time, I could look at him not with resentment or disappointment, but with cautious hope. But it wasn't just Ben who had changed. I had changed. I had learned that sometimes the most difficult part of letting go isn't releasing the other person. It's releasing your own expectations of them. I had spent so many years clinging to an ideal of what my son should be, and in doing so, I had lost sight of the most important thing, my own happiness. I spent more time doing things for myself, things I had never given myself permission to do before. I went on trips to places I had only dreamed of, taking long drives to the countryside, hiking through mountain trails, exploring quiet towns and markets I had never visited. These were the things I had once thought impossible, always waiting for the right moment or the right person to do them with. But now, I did them on my own, and the joy I felt was immeasurable. And then, one day, I woke up with the idea of something I had never considered before: selling the mansion. It wasn't because I didn't love it. It was everything I had ever wanted. But as I sat in the garden watching the flowers bloom, I realized that the space had become too big, too empty. It was no longer a reflection of what I needed. It was a symbol of the life I had built for myself after letting go of the past. But I wasn't tied to it anymore. I could move on from it. I wasn't running away from anything. I had built a life that didn't need a mansion to be fulfilling. It was time for something smaller, something simpler. I realized I wanted to live in a space that reflected the quiet confidence I had now. I didn't need grandeur to feel important. I had already discovered that what mattered most was the life I lived, not the space I inhabited. I put the house up for sale, and it sold quickly, too quickly in fact. But I didn't feel regret. I felt relief. The new buyer was a young couple with a child, and as I handed over the keys, I realized that this house was no longer a part of me. It had served its purpose, and now it was time for someone else to create memories in it. I drove away from the mansion with a sense of peace, knowing that my next chapter would be one of simplicity and ease. The house, the money, the things. It didn't define me. What defined me now was my ability to create the life I wanted, regardless of what the world thought. I moved into a small, cozy cottage on the outskirts of town, where the sound of birds and the wind in the trees was the loudest noise I could hear. It was everything I needed: peaceful, intimate, and just enough space for me to breathe. I filled it with warmth, with the comfort of a life well lived. I still had my friends, my hobbies, and the satisfaction of knowing I had made it. Ben continued to visit, and each time I saw him growing more and more into the man I had always hoped he could be. He was more thoughtful now, more considerate, and I could see that he was trying, truly trying, to be the son I deserved. He respected the boundaries I had set, and that meant everything. But no matter where our relationship went, I knew that I was no longer dependent on it for my happiness. And so, as I sat in my little cottage one evening, watching the sunset over the hills, I realized something. I didn't need a mansion to feel complete. I didn't need anything to prove that I was worthy. I had found my worth the day I chose myself, the day I stopped waiting for someone else to make my life meaningful. I had created a life that was filled with purpose, peace, and love. Not just love from others, but love for myself. And that was the greatest gift I could ever give myself. The future, once uncertain, now felt full of possibility. Whatever came next, I knew I was ready. I had built this life from the ground up, and nothing could take it away from me.